And I will tell you what it also tells me is that it tells me that LeBron James is a monster for playing in 8 or 9 consecutive finals.
Absolutely.
On his body. Like his body, his genetics are just insane.
I agree. I agree.
So, hold on. That was my car alarm.
So. Cool.
What time are we starting? Now?
Now. So
all right, let's go for it.
Let's share screen and let's broadcast. Cool. Alrighty. So I guess we'll give it a couple more minutes as attendees start joining in.
Sounds good to me.
Awesome. Are you in the Bay Area today?
Yeah, I'm home today, working from home in my lovely downtown office of laundry room / office / guest room.
Awesome.
So that's how we roll around here. We don't spend money on overhead.
That's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Cool. I guess we can start now.
Yeah, we should go ahead and get rolling. Yeah, let's go for it.
Perfect. Awesome. So welcome everyone. Hope you're having a great Tuesday. It's my absolute pleasure and honor to welcome Richard Harris as our guest for this webinar. Richard, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to have this conversation. It should be a lot of fun.
That is awesome. So just for context, Richard is the founder of Harris Consulting Group. He's probably one of the most well-known sales trainers to some of the fastest growing SaaS companies. Some of them you might have already heard of, SalesLoft, Intercom, PagerDuty, and even Visa, I noticed.
Yeah.
So that's great. And so yeah, I'm super excited to have Richard here in this webinar with us. And the topic is something that I guess we are both pretty passionate about. The whole topic for today's webinar would be, how can salespeople use trigger events or sales triggers, if you may call it, for better prospecting or better sales process, maybe. That's what we'll discuss. So without further ado, let's get started. Richard,
sure.
Welcome. One question that I want to get started with, which is slightly off topic of this. I know I have been following you on LinkedIn for a while, and one hashtag that you seem to have created, and it's pretty interesting, is hashtag shit my sales manager used to say.
Yeah.
So, what's the story behind that?
Yeah, and first of all, I didn't create this hashtag. I have to give it up to my friend Kevin Gaither, who is a monster sales leader, lives down in LA. I think he's over at ZipRecruiter. If you're in the LA area and you're looking for a good leader who's built a great program, Kevin's the guy. But it was his, and I once said something, and he hashtagged that to me, and I'm like, oh, that's hilarious. He's like, well, you should go post it on LinkedIn. And over time, I just said, hey, Kevin, can I use that more often? Do you mind? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. So I've sort of definitely used it a lot, but I cannot take credit for creating it. That's how I got created. The purpose of it was that Kevin and I grew up in a different world of being Gen Xers, where we didn't get sales training, right? Like what you guys get now, what people get now, what I do for people, I would have called that micromanagement back in my day, in my 20s. I would have been like, oh my God, you're driving me nuts. That's considered training and coaching. And frankly, it is the right way to do it now. Like we should have been doing it that way. And so there were all these phrases that, our bosses would say to us, like, failure's not an option.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. But we sort of both had to drink that Kool-Aid. So we sort of bring up those old school things because we know that they're funny. We know there's a little bit of pain associated when we say that because we know it's still being said today.
Yeah.
So we're trying to make fun of ourselves. We're trying to not make fun of that's not the right way to do it. And then generally, I try to put something in positive to say, now here's the right way to do it. So that's how we've done it. That's how it came about. So much of a hat tip to Kevin Gaither for sure.
That's awesome. No, I love it because funny you mentioned that, because some of them, the sarcasm is so strong in it. When you read it, it's like, is this real or is it bad?
It hurts. Yeah.
Right? So That's too funny. Cool. So let's get started.
Sure.
I know trigger events is a hot topic. It has always been. It might have been called something else. So one of the things that I was wondering, Richard, is what would you consider? What would be a definition of a trigger event?
Yeah.
According to you.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of trigger events. And by the way, I'd even encourage folks, feel free to pop questions in the Q&A or the chat. We'll monitor it, and we'll answer them as we go along because it's a little bit more fun that way. Also, I always recommend people when they're on webinars, go into the Q&A or the chat where everybody can see everything, and just give your name and the name of your company or something. Try to create a little more engagement in the community. But as for trigger events, they can be anything. Right. And I know that's way too broad. These are the ones that I think we all know about, and they probably have been beaten too much. Right. So funding alerts, right? When someone raises funding, employee hires, right? Any kind of press release the company's put out, you can find a trigger event. Even if it's not related to sales, you can make it a trigger event. I think that anything about the company that matches what your company does, right? If there's some level of giving back, or if they're participating in some kind of nonprofit or doing something like that, that's a trigger event. It doesn't always have to be a growth event. What you're looking for is just some level of commonality so that when you do make contact, it can be a little bit more personal or personable. I think that's the big trigger event. The biggest trigger event, though, and this is the hardest part, is using the pains you solve as the trigger, right? Because that's the most important thing. When you don't do that, it's hard. So when I look at a lot of emails, and I'll stop pontificating in a moment, but when I see a lot of outbound messaging, companies talk about what they do in those messages. They don't talk about the pains they solve. Nobody cares what we do. They only care what pains we solve. And those pains have to be related to the title of the person you're talking to, right? So Toucan, if you know, as the CEO of LeadSift, your desires around growing revenue are as equally meaningful as your sales manager who's on the front line with the team, but you have different pains associated with that. Right? Your pain might be, I need greater visibility to see what's happening with the team. The manager's pain may be around, helping my team, coaching my team to be better at sales and get more qualified leads, right? Or more qualified deals. It's the same pain, but they have different context, right? And I know some people say it a different way, but I say if content is king, context is the kingdom. Right? And so we have to put the right context around those trigger events and the pains we solve. So I'm going to pause there because we kind of move from an external trigger event to how to build an internal trigger event as I see it.
Yeah. So I had a question there, Richard, not to put you in the spot. So you mentioned the key is, and I think we'll talk about it later, but I thought it was pretty relevant, is how can a salesperson who's prospecting, the key is using that trigger event and leveraging it in something that is contextual to the prospect that you're reaching out to. So to give an example, let's say I find out a company is opening up a new office.
Great.
As a growth trigger event, and I sell an IT infrastructure software. How would I be able to use it, or can I? Should I?
So there's a couple of different ways, right? So one way is a congratulations. Congrats on your new office, right? That's sort of your subject line of the email. Hopefully, and again, this even comes from John Barrows, his approach is to say, well, we recently expanded offices, assuming you did. Now you have something in common. Hey, congrats on your new office. We actually just went through a growth phase last year and moved into new offices. It's always chaotic, something like that. So I understand how, it must be exciting, but frustrating too. I'd love to talk to you about these pains, right? So you create some level of mutual admiration for each other and then move into a pain that you solve, not what you do. So that is one way to build that context, right? The other way is, I call it the interview technique, where you literally say, hey, I'd love to interview you about your new offices. and how that relates to growth expansion, or how you manage that as you're continuing to grow, right? And it's a very subtle and it's a very different way to establish a meeting, right? But as soon as you send somebody with any level of authority an interview question, like I'd like to have an interview, your context for your meeting changes. It's an interview, but it allows you to go in and just ask them some questions. So, where were you before you started to do the move? How much time do you think you're going to lose? Do you think that's going to affect your sales team? How do you think it's going to help you grow? And hopefully by doing this interview technique, and this is a fast forward version of me teaching it, but if you wanted to do that, then you can't turn around and pitch them unless they turn around and go, hey, Richard, yeah, that was fun. Like, by the way, just what do you do, Richard? Like, tell me about you. Because oftentimes what happens is that they feel obligated to ask you what you do because you spend so much time listening to them. Right? This is the rule of reciprocity at its finest. And part of this is that, hey, in some cases, you may just be able to interview them and ask them a couple of questions for 15 or 20 minutes and you move on and you don't get to pitch yourself. That's okay, because hopefully some of those questions, you can also pepper in, how do they handle these situations as it relates to your IT infrastructure, right? So it might be like, hey, let me ask you about this, how you moved, when you guys decided, what do you think it's going to do to the team in terms of performance? By the way, when you're moving into a new facility, how do you look at this challenge of the IT infrastructure? When do you look at that? How do you view that? Is that when you make changes, or do you want to make changes after you've moved and the dust is settled, right? Then it becomes a little bit more about you, but it's not direct. It's not like you're trying to start to pitch them, right?
Fair enough.
That's really what I think we're talking about. So
love it. So there's a question actually from the audience, and one of the questions is, do you need an existing customer story tied to the trigger event for context? Like, do you need to refer like, oh, by the way, I see you are moving. You also helped this company who were expanding into a new office solve this, or something like that?
I think it depends. It's a great question. The more context you have, the better. I do say this: you should memorize your case studies and your use cases so that you can pull the right thing, right? So for example, my brother-in-law is actually in the office furniture business. So yes, for him, having that case study or having that use case of, hey, we've helped a lot of people move, or we've helped redesign the office, totally makes sense, right? I'm a sales trainer, right? If I were going to cold call somebody or cold email them, I might not use the new office as my trigger event. I could, but I would have to find a creative way to do it. For me, it's like, I might say, I'm really jealous of your new office because I'm working downstairs in my, home office / laundry room / guest room, right? Like, that's, again, finding creative ways to do it. What I would encourage people to do is that it's not one trigger event that's going to get you through. I think the latest data, I can't remember if it's Sales Loft or Outreach or somebody has said that it's like 13 to 15 touches to get them to take the meeting, right? And so it's really, one trigger event ain't going to be it, right? It's going to be multiple different approaches to talking to these people. And a trigger event is just a way for you to create context, to build value, and then ask for a meeting.
Okay. No, that makes total sense. So let me ask you this: as a sales trainer, then, Richard, have you ever used a trigger event?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
All the time.
What was it?
Yeah. Well, and actually, and I do teach this. I do teach people to use trigger events in their outbound prospecting. I remember this is one of my favorites. It was literally my first client, and who was it? It wasn't Targus, but it was one of these companies that makes backpacks and keyboards and it was Logitech. It was Logitech.
Okay.
And he went, and rather than finding a trigger event, he found out something personal about the CEO. The CEO wrote something about having a liberal arts degree and why he valued a liberal arts degree. And this kid actually had a liberal arts degree. And literally while in the training session, it was a very personal, hyper-personalized message. Hey, read your article, loved it. I actually have a liberal arts degree from this university. It's been really beneficial in my business world. I'm contacting you to talk about this pain. And like within an hour, he got a meeting, and they got like a big 6-figure deal out of that. So So trigger events and personalization and personalization matters, right? So that's how I see it. But it could be things like office move, funding, new hires, right? Anytime the target that you're looking for, this is one of my favorite things to tell people. If the titles of the people if you know the titles of the people you're going after, I would try to find anybody who's 30, 60, or 90 days new into their role, right? That's a very important trigger event. Those people have something to prove because they were brought on board.
Yeah.
They were brought on board to make growth happen or improvements to the current process. They have juice in terms of at least getting the attention of decision makers if they're not the decision maker, right? They could have more budget because
Your
their
voice
higher.
is breaking up a little bit, Richard. Sorry, it broke up. Now it's fine.
Is that good?
It's fine.
I don't know what people heard, but if these people have the juice, they have the ear of the decision maker, they also could have the budget, and they certainly have the willingness to try something new because they were brought in to do something different. So one of the best trigger events is their start date. And if you can pull that from LinkedIn or other places, that's one of the best ones out there.
Perfect. So that's awesome. So we got another question, and an interesting question from the audience. It was around the fact that the stat that you mentioned that, you need to reach out to them, or, you need to have 12 to 15 touches. Assuming you got one trigger event, as you said, and that's not going to cut it. How do you hit them or touch them multiple times without spamming or using the same trigger event?
Got it. Yeah, no, it's a tough game, and it's a great question. So there's a couple of things that you should think about touches, right? So sometimes a touch is just a LinkedIn like. Sometimes it's a LinkedIn follow. Sometimes it's a LinkedIn invitation. Sometimes it's a comment on a LinkedIn, right? So that's just LinkedIn. You could Twitter them, do the same thing, a retweet with a comment, a like of their tweet, a follow of them, right? All these touches are designed to just sort of try to sort of make them be aware of you. Depending on how well they've set their settings, many times each of these touches sends an email to their inbox, right? So this is the way I would tell you to look at this. If I've got 12 to 15 touches, I would probably start with 7 or 8 touches where I don't do anything other than send them signals. I could go onto LinkedIn and follow them, sends them a message. I could go in and like something that they comment on, right? I could comment on their stuff, right? I could tweet them, retweet them. There's all kind of touches you can do before you ever ask for the meeting. Now that assumes they're on the social platform. So I know that's going to be one of the next questions, right?
Yeah.
So in a best case scenario, they are, in a worst case scenario, they're not. But so you need different types of sequences or cadences, depending on the tool you're using. So that is one very important thing. You could think about it, you could have 7 or 8 touches before you ever send them an email or make a phone call. And people freak out. Like some leaders go, oh my God, but we need to get them on the phone. I'm like, look, just run through the cycle, for a week. And by the second week, you're starting to make the emails and phone calls, and hopefully you see an uptick. That's the test. That's the A/B test.
Yeah.
That being said, you do need to have what I call awareness statements. What's a 1-sentence description of the pain you solve, not what you do, right? A pain you solve. So for example, in my world, hey, what I do, I'm a sales trainer that won these awards from the AAISP, great, whoopee, yay. I'm excited about it, but that's a so what.
That doesn't solve my pain.
Right. But if I turn around and say, hey, I teach reps how to earn the right to ask questions and how to actually ask them, that speaks to a sales manager, a CEO, a head of sales. It at least paints a picture in their head of the pain they're solving.
Fair enough.
So going back to this point, you definitely need 3 or 4 or 5 awareness statements. You have a good awareness statement when you can paint a picture of the pain you solve. When you can paint a picture for the person you're going to and have them realize in their head, oh yeah, that is a pain, right? If the pain you solve is, not making you sit there on Sunday night and do the pipeline adjustment, right? If I send that kind of pain to a SVP of sales or a CEO, then by all means, guess what? They're pretty happy. I know they at least recognize the pain I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Sorry. So
cool. No,
anyway, so I'll pause there, and I can pontificate, as you can tell. So I'm going to pause and see where you want to go.
Great. That is some awesome insight. So moving on. So now that we know what are different trigger events, so one thing then that naturally comes is, well, how do you identify these trigger events? Whether it's someone new in the job, them having a new office, funding, or writing a blog or something. How would a salesperson or a sales team get this data?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of tools out there, right? So we all know about Google Alerts, which I think has sort of gone to the wayside. Another great tool out there is Owler. That does something. I think there's another tool called Nudge that does something. And by the way, if other people know other tools, please go put those in the chat or the Q&A, because people in the field know this stuff often better than I do because they're using it every day. So those are the ones that I typically recommend, but I'm sure there's tons out there. I think Discover.org will give you some level of trigger events through some news. I think that press releases, if you follow the company, gives you news. I think if you follow them on LinkedIn, you can find stuff. You can find things where you just sort of go to them and say, hey, your recent post about this or your recent post about that, just to get their attention. But then you better have a good, just to get their, eyeballs on you. But then you better have a really good, awareness statement.
Yeah, no, that's great. Someone mentioned that Crunchbase sends email alerts.
They do. I've seen that. That's a great recommendation. Thank you for putting that out there.
Cool. So I guess one question. So some of the trigger events that you're talking about, Richard, they are all sort of external, right? Like happening outside. What are your thoughts on trigger events that are happening on first party, on your own content? So what I mean by that is, if you have a free product, if you see if a prospect logs into your free product multiple times in a month, can that be used as a trigger event by the salesperson following up?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, per John Barrows, stop saying following up, checking in, touching base, circling back to the top, right? Like you just sound like everybody else. I do think you can talk about usage, right? If you have that kind of a portal, you could have it as a recommendations of usage. You could have thank you. We see you're logging in all the time. I just want to say thank you. If you ever have questions, let me know, right? There was, I want to go, this actually reminds me of one other thing. By all means, in your touches of 12 to 15, have one or two value-added touches. A value-added touch is where you give away something and expect nothing in return, right? So, hey, I saw this article that relates to your industry. I thought you'd like it. Talk to you later, right? That's a touch. That's you giving away information for free, telling them that you're top of mind and I'm thinking about your business, and then you leave them alone. Right? Every time you send them something, don't ask for something back. Sometimes you just send something to be gracious and kind. And if you think about it, that's kind of what our parents have raised us to do, right? You sort of give and create this karma in the world, and it'll come back to you one day.
So tying this back to one of the questions that someone had asked was around auto outbound prospecting.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do these personalization and these trigger-based emailing or touches, how does that work with automated email sequences?
You can't. Right, they can't. Stop thinking that they can. Like everybody thinks that you can create something that's sort of personalized or at least feels personalized, and think that you can do a spray and pray approach. You can't. You have to get better at this, right? The tools out there aren't meant to increase pray and spray. They're meant to allow you to build relative and strong relationships with these people to earn the right to ask for this meeting, right? And again, you've got to spend time in it. If the goal is to make 50 phone calls and send 50 emails a day, if your data can support that it's working, I will support you doing it. But I would say A/B test, let's do 15 hyper-personalized emails a day and 50 phone calls or whatever it is, right? I would tell you to test that, because your total addressable market's only so big, right? You can't just spray and pray. Like, I've got one client, and guess who they sell to? Universities in the United States of America, right? And they sell to the marketing department only. Guess what? That's 3,100. You got about 3,100 universities, give or take, right?
Yep.
And you can't go through this spray and pray approach. It just doesn't work.
Yep.
They want those people to be clients today, tomorrow, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and 15 years from now.
Got it. No, that makes total sense. I think that answered the question. So moving on to the next part is, so we talked about, how can they use trigger events and that stuff. Now, let me ask you one question. Trigger events traditionally, as we hear, is typically used for prospecting, meaning, you're reaching out to someone relatively cold. They don't know of you or your company,
Yep.
and you're leveraging this positive company event, growth event, or something to enter, start a dialogue.
Yeah.
In your experience, can trigger event be used in different stages of the funnel, meaning in a lower funnel where a deal has stalled, or even can it be used for customer success purposes?
Yeah. So I'll give you a couple of examples, right? I've been, knock on wood, fortunately enough, 2 clients, Zoom and PagerDuty went public in the last 6 months or year. And absolutely, I didn't even, at that point, they were already customers. So this is sort of that customer success place, right? Or even if I were a rep trying to upsell or cross-sell, it's like, hey man, congrats on the IPO. Well done. That's my message. Like, it's not like, great, now that you've gone IPO, spend more money with me. Like, that's rude, right? It's more like, these people have busted their butt for years and years and years, and they deserve the right to just receive a congratulations, right? So I think that is a great way to do it. If someone's gone cold and maybe they're expanding their office, like the first example, hey, congrats on the new office. Hope the move goes well and the dust settles quickly. Simple. You're just being friendly. You're being a human. So, you could use that to someone who's in the pipeline, and, you may have a meeting next week and you see that they announced expansion today. Well, I'd still send that note today to just say, hey, I'm paying attention to you. Congrats. Right. So in fact, those trigger events for me are often as equally important outside the realm of asking for a meeting as they are to help get the meeting. Right?
That's awesome. Oh, that's great.
There's one other place I also want to tell people to look for trigger events. I forgot. If you're working with publicly traded companies, they often, I can't remember if it's quarterly or biannually, they have to put out a 10K report, right? Lists all the things that they're working on. That thing is so chock full of nuggets and ideas and data. And if you just say, hey, saw your 10K report, well, now you're proving that you're doing real research, that you're paying attention, you understand the business value that the businesses that they're trying to run, and that, you're here to help make sure nothing bad goes in that 10K report, so to speak. I wouldn't necessarily say that out loud, but that's what I would say.
No, that's great. So while we are on the
10K report is really good.
10K, eh? Yeah. And I've heard a lot of people talk about that. So, but the problem is going through it, that massive pile of text, and figuring out these pieces of information. So,
dude, I can't do it all for you. If you
fair
want to hire
enough.
me to do that, you can hire me for that. Right?
So, couple of suggestions people said. One was sec.gov to find the 10K. That's a website. And then, and the other one was check out analyst presentations.
That's a great idea too. I hadn't thought about those. That's great. Thank you for those suggestions, everybody.
One question that someone asked here is, what about churn customers? Customers that have used you, left you for whatever reason. Can you use a trigger event to bring them back?
Yeah, I think so, but I don't think the goal of a trigger event and the goal of anything with a churned customer isn't to bring them back. The goal of any communication to a churned customer is to get them to want to talk to you again. That's the first step, right? I got to get them back on the phone. So I think when we say, hey, let me find a trigger event to win them back, you're thinking too far ahead, right? You gotta go one step. excuse me, the one thing you got to do is you got to make them even want to get on the phone with you.
Absolutely.
And then if they get on the phone with you, you got to make them want to talk to you about previous experience. And if they do that, you got to make them want to be open to working with you again, because hopefully you have something better. So you got about 3 or 4 things you need to accomplish before you ever get to the point of bringing them back. Right. So for me, I would, it's a great way to do it, but it's really just a knock on the door. It's not opening the door.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. I guess we are at a time where we'll take some Q&A questions. So there's one question that I see here. So thank you, by the way, the attendees to be asking these questions as we go through that. That's great.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's way more engaging.
Very engaging. I love it. So one question there is here is, do you guys think there are a group of core trigger events that apply to every industry? Or should the trigger events you leverage change by industry you sell to?
Yeah, I don't know that that's a great question. Yeah. I mean, I think there are core trigger events. Again, I'm in the Bay Area, and I work in startups. So funding is a core trigger event.
Yeah.
Going public, SEC filings, those kinds of things. Those are similar across many companies. New hires are similar across. Like I could be selling to, an engineering company in Pennsylvania, and if I see they've got a new hire or a new head of engineering, even though I'm talking to a sales leader, I might send an email to the sales leader saying, "Hey, I saw you guys hired a new head of engineering. Good luck working with them." Or I find a polite way to say, "Hey, I hope you guys can find a good groove to get into together," or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those big trigger events matter, right? Is there a single one that works every time? If that's kind of the question, as far as I know, there isn't. If I did, I would have, trademarked it and licensed it and,
but
gone away with it.
Your point though, Richard, there would be, what you're saying is there isn't one that applies across everything, but there are, depending on the industry you're selling it into, the trigger events would be slightly different.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Just go ahead.
Sure. Good.
Yep.
Cool. There's one question that has come in is, it was around the churned customer. The question is, would you use the same idea on closed lost deals versus churned customers?
Yeah, it's a great question. So re-engaging a closed lost deal is really, really important in my opinion. I always make a note at about 90 days or 180 days to just email them and say, "Hey, I know you went with another vendor, totally respect the decision. I'd love to hear how it's going. I'd love to see, I send messages. Sometimes things don't always go as planned. I hope that they do. Like I want to compliment them for making a decision that's good for their business.
Yep.
If something has changed and it's not going the way you want, I'd love to, re-engage. Right.
Fair enough.
But I also think too that part of what you do is during those 90 or 180 days before you send that message, I would try to find some of those value add messages I would send, like, "Hey, I saw this article, thought you'd like it. Take care." Right. Saw that, you just let them know that you're there as a resource, that you hold no hard feelings or grudges, even though maybe internally you do, but that you're still available to be a resource for them.
Fair enough. No, that's great. I have one question for you, Richard, is what happens? So trigger events are great, right? You can use it to engage your buyer in a more contextual way so that you don't have to do the hated just checking and just following up emails. But what happens when you are selling into a super niche industry or selling into SMBs or something where there are not enough trigger events that are easily available? What do you do?
Yeah. So that, so I'll interpret that a certain way. Like I have some friends who, maybe they work at Yelp and they're calling the boutique salon. Maybe they only own 3 salons, right? But that's for Yelp, that's a good customer, right? Or you're calling the real estate agents, right? I think you have to find industry related events or trigger events like, "Hey, found an article about what's happening in your industry, thought you'd like it. Would love to talk to you." I also think that in some cases, if I think about SMB, some SMB is about just picking up the phone and calling, right? And making sure you have a solid, cold call pitch and script that isn't, hi, this is Richard calling from the Harris Consulting Group, right? Having a better pitch than that, because as soon as we all hear that, the walls of resistance go up. So I think there are different strategies you have to approach. And in some cases, there may not be a trigger event that works, right? That is also where I think that interview technique comes in.
That's awesome. No, that's great. Cool. I guess we can, is there anyone else who has a question? I know there were quite a few, and hopefully they were all answered.
I think so. Yeah, no, it was great. And by the way, thanks to everybody who was asking all the questions. It was very fun, and it makes it more engaging, and kind of makes it easier for us. Makes it, so.
Cool. So what I'm going to do next is, if there are no more questions, Richard, I'd like to thank you again for your time.
My pleasure.
It was super helpful, super insightful, and something that's super relevant for anyone in sales or even customer success. So thank you for that. For the audience, we will be recording this, and we are recording this, and we will. I hope we are. And you can watch it later. So with that, thank you very much. Thanks everyone.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you, and
appreciate your time.
Cool. Awesome.
Thanks again.
Take care. See you, Richard.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Right. Richard, we'll jump off the call, and then I'll talk to you later.
That sounds good. I got to jump onto another call.
Cool. Take care. Bye-bye.